everyone, and welcome to today's Sam at Home panel, where we will be discussing storytelling with music and sound for TV. My name is Kai Savas. I am the founder of Film.Music.Media. I am thrilled to be here today to speak to some amazing creatives about sound and music in film, television, and video games. So let's get started. First up, she is the composer of The Lost Husband and co-composer of Riverdale and Batwoman. Please welcome Sherri Chung. Sherri, it's nice to have you. Next, you can hear his music in the true crime series Cold Justice and Netflix's baking competition series Sugar Rush. Please welcome Robert ToTeras.
Hey, thanks for having me.
How's it going, Robert? Next, she is a music editor and was a re-recording mix technician on Avengers Endgame and Captain Marvel. Please welcome Annlie Huang.
Hi.
How's it going? Next, he is also known as Electropoint and recently scored the psychological thriller Huracán, now available on HBO Max. Please welcome Molino Dunn.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Next, she created the original music on Fangoria's Porno and Lotte, the Silhouette Girl. Please welcome Carla Patullo.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Hey, Carla. Next, he is supervising sound editor, re-recording mixer, and most recently an ADR mixer on HBO's Lovecraft Country and Netflix's The Old Guard. Please welcome Miguel Araujo.
Hey, thanks for having me.
How's it going, Miguel? And last but certainly not least, he is a composer at SkewSound, the audio company behind the Signs of Sojourner video game. Please welcome Steve Pardo.
Great to be with you all.
The first question is for everyone. And so I'm interested in all your kind of recent projects. What's something maybe that has been a creative challenge that you recently had to overcome? Or if you don't have anything in that camp, what's something that has been creatively rewarding for you from one of your most recent projects? Let's start with Steve.
Yeah, so every video game sort of has its own set of creative challenges and obstacles to overcome, usually regarding game design, how the music can fit in with the game and the game design, the wishes of the game design team. So that's always a creative challenge. And most recently with the Signs of the Sojourner game, not only did we have to come up with a plan for how to implement music across multiple locations, multiple characters, but the music, the actual like style of the art and the story behind the characters, I personally felt like very inspired by, and we utilize sort of like music style and influence that is very closely like associated with my history and just who I am as a person, as a composer. So I approached this soundtrack in a very rewarding way where it almost felt like I was just making an album for myself, one I would just happen to release if it wasn't for a product. So much so that like we actually started a band here in Nashville, sort of like inspired by the music of this soundtrack, which doesn't always happen with every project that we approach. So that was definitely a rewarding experience.
All right, let's jump to Miguel.
Hey, yeah, so this one's not quite recent, but it was super challenging and very rewarding. I'll go ahead with this one from Wu Assassins, a show that I supervised the ADR on. On episode 4, we had about 12 minutes of completely replaced dialogue. We had the stuff from the set, but being a fight series, it was quite noisy, and a lot of the time it's the stunt people on the set as well, so it's not actually the actors themselves performing the stunts. In this case, we had a lot of actors performing the stunts, but it's still, we wanted a clean pass on that. So, you know, we brought them all back into the studio, also brought some extras that came in and did loop group for us as well for the villains that they were fighting with. And one by one, we brought everyone in, and I meticulously sat there and spotted and figured out exactly how we want this to be achieved, and making sure we recreated these scenes so that it's totally believable when someone goes and watches this later on, that all just existed from the set. So yeah, it was a huge challenge to pull that off for 12 straight minutes on TV in TV schedules, but it was super rewarding to watch it on Netflix and see everyone pulled it off.
Carla, let's jump to you.
Well, I'm currently working on a project called The Ignition. It's an album, and it's a meditative horror album. And so right off the bat, you've got these two elements of, you know, meditation and horror, just trying to piece those together and create a fluid score. And so it's been very interesting. I'm also personally have a hard time meditating, so it's really tested my anxiety and managing anxiety, and musically that's kind of where it goes.
Absolutely. Robert, let's jump to you.
I do a show called Sugar Rush on Netflix, and it's a fun show which has gotten incredibly popular over the pandemic because people are looking for super fun things. So I started working on that March 15th, I think. So as you know, the world shut down and we were all living in fear and having to write really fun EDM, which is the score for Sugar Rush. That was an incredible creative challenge.
Annlie, let's jump over to you.
So as a mixed tech, most of the creative challenges we face are, as the name implies, very technical. So it's a little hard to go into any particular examples without getting really in the weeds. But I would say the payoff for all those moments is when you get to sit on the dub stage and watch it all come together in a playback. Because you spend a lot of time as a tech listening to like the specific elements, like the mixer will just work on dialogue for the whole day. So you just hear the movie with only dialogue or only music or only the sound effects. And so when at the end of like a long run of working on it, you see it all come together and all the emotional points are delivering and it's really working to enhance what the picture is giving you, and it really like starts hitting you in the gut. And knowing that you were like part of the pin that held everything together and allowed all these elements to, come together and deliver, that is really ultimately rewarding on every single show.
Absolutely. Let's go over to Sherri.
Yeah, so Blake and I write the score to a show called Riverdale. And as we know, last year, Luke Perry passed away, which was the first time I'd ever really dealt with something like that. And so the season premiere for that show, what they wanted to do was, to address it. And, it was interesting because Blake and I talked about it. We were like, this is something that I haven't dealt with before. And, we wanted to do a string orchestra. We ended up doing all that. It wasn't so much that it was like a creatively fulfilling moment because of the music that we got to write. It was more like for the first time in my experience and in my career in a film and television setting, was I asked to do something that had nothing to do with the entertainment. But this was a moment where, wow, the honor and the privilege to be able to help audiences and help maybe even to a certain extent the actors when they watch the show later, work through this very real life non-entertainment type of thing. So it's an honor and a privilege when you get called upon to do something like that in a very unfortunate situation.
Absolutely. It's just amazing to hear everyone's kind of just, how everyone's experiencing it individually. So let's jump into some kind of more specific questions. And Sherri, we'll start with you. Alongside your success in television, you've recently been breaking into the film world with Nancy Drew and The Hidden Staircase and The Lost Husband. What have been some unique challenges of film as a medium compared to TV?
It's interesting because before I was doing a lot of the television work, I started in film. So I was like,
right.
I didn't think much of it. It's like, this is the job. It's tough. It's hard. You do your thing. And then when I got into TV, I was like, oh my gosh, this is like, this is insane. It's so much, it felt like it was originally it felt like it was not just about the music anymore, but it was about the logistics of getting this thing done. I think in episodic, it kind of creates this really awesome, creative, fulfilling moment where you have to rely and learn to trust your instincts and really learn to go with your gut, because writer's block's not really, allowed, like missing your deadlines, not feeling it that day. But I think that's, I guess how that translates into film, I would say that between the two, I don't have a different approach in terms of scoring a scene or looking at it that way. But I think what's really interesting is that in a lot of the TV that I'm doing, I can't see the full arc of a character. I don't know where they're going to go, how they're going to be developed, how long they're going to last on the show, how long the show is going to last. So when I think you're making themes and, motifs, and you're trying to build those things, you're like, all right, I have to put this through all of my tests. Can this be an emo theme? Can it be action? Can we beef it up? Can we slow it down? Can we do all these things? And obviously in a film, you can see the entire arc of a story. So, it's our job. It's the job.
Absolutely. So Carla, let's jump to you. So we have to talk about Fangoria's Porno. And of course, for everyone watching, no, this is not an actual porno.
No, I tell everyone, it's still the most prestigious thing I've ever done.
It's absolutely amazing. So it's a horror comedy about a group of teenage movie theater workers who are being terrorized by a sex demon. Can you tell us a little bit how you got involved with the film and what did you bring musically to it?
Yeah, so in 2018, I was selected to be part of the Sundance Film and Music Sound Design Lab. And so, yeah, so I was so excited to get into the lab, and then they tell me, yeah, we picked a film for you. It's called Porno. And I was like, okay, all right. But when I saw the film, I instantly fell in love with it. It's just, horror comedy. So we went to the lab, and one of the first things we developed there was a theme and how we were going to approach the succubus in the film, played by Caitlin Pierce, who's phenomenal. So we worked that out, and I decided to use a lot of my voice and sing sirens and play with my vocals, run them through amps, just mess with them, and have all this fun with it. And, so it was great.
And the end result's fantastic. So congrats on such an amazing project. I want to jump over to Annlie. So Annlie, Captain Marvel and Avengers Endgame are two perfect examples of how, sound is it's the most important thing there really for the viewing experience. Tell us about your role as a re-recording mix technician on both of these films.
So the visual effects in Marvel titles are amazing, which means the sound effects are amazing, and also the emotional punches along with the humor also mean that the music score really, really serves up like a really, really sweet, impact. And then the dialogue also has to be on point, so you get both plot and comedy. And I will say one of the most memorable experiences I have on working on this is we were doing a scoring session that happened at Abbey Road, and we had Alan Silvestri and Dennis Sands on the stage with us, and just seeing the score come to life with these amazing musicians in real time playing against picture, when it actually breathes into real air molecules of sound moving, and you have it against picture, and it hits you and the executives and the director all at the same time. That was like one of the most moving moments of my professional experience so far.
We're going to jump back to TV for a bit. So TV producer Dick Wolf, everyone knows that name, as he's a master storyteller and having created hit shows like Law and Order in Chicago. So Robert, how did you become involved with him for Cold Justice? And can you give us kind of an insight into how you sonically make the show stand out from other crime shows and other Dick Wolf projects?
I had just done a reality show called Around the World in 80 Plates. And I was reading the trades, and they announced Cold Justice. And these two one former prosecutor from Houston, and the woman who Mark Helgenberger's characters in CSI was based on, are coming together to solve real cold case murders in small towns. And I read that, and I knew exactly what it sounded like. And so I called my music supervisor over there, and I said, "What's Cold Justice?" And she was like, "I don't know." And it turns out they hadn't even sold the show. It had been announced, but they hadn't sold it. And I said, "Look, I know what this show sounds like. I'm going to give you like 10 cues. Can you just use them for the presentation?" She's like, "Well, that would actually save me a lot of work." So I gave them 10 cues. They edited into the presentation. It was like a 15-minute presentation to TNT, where it's like this deck where they use like different pictures and different, nothing's been filmed. They sold the show, and then they called me, and there was never another composer. And actors always talk about this all the time. I knew I was made for this part, so I showed up in the audition in costume. You hear actors telling those crazy stories all the time, or I sought out the producer, and that's basically just what I did. I was just I know what this is. I know what it's going to sound like. Let's do this.
Steve, let's jump to you. So scoring a video game is such a different process than scoring a film and television. Can you give us a glimpse into that process and tell us a few things that maybe audiences might not know behind the music of Signs of Sojourner, the game?
Game scoring in a lot of ways is similar to film and TV, depending on what kind of game it is and how big the studio is and what their needs are. I've scored a good amount of TV as well, and I was struck by how much I could actually feel very comfortable in that seat. Like, but most games are going to have some level of interactivity, either that the game design team wants, or that you as the composer are viewing sort of the specifications of the game design, and can propose, actually, the soundtrack's going to work a lot better if we kind of broke it apart and structured it this way. We were fed some values, some parameters from the game engine, and it could drive the music in this really powerful and emotional way. So it's kind of I wouldn't call it a compromise. I hate that word, but it's like, if you're like me, I love that technical challenge. I'm a jazz musician, but I also love AI generative music, et cetera, et cetera. So like there's a part of that I find creatively rewarding. Science of the Sojourner was kind of in the middle, where it's a long, sprawling narrative. The game mechanic is actually fascinating. It's where the actual card game resembles a conversation. That in and of itself, it like deserves a ton of credit. It's fascinating. But like the music didn't have to one-to-one respond to that. Like if we were tracking every card that was being played, the music would feel kind of disjointed. So it didn't have to like completely, in this case, match what's happening in the gameplay. So all we had to do, which is why I had a lot of fun doing this, is like basically make a bunch of town themes and have the characters sort of feel a part of that environment. So there's like a level of bass soundtrack, which is looping and basically just a song. And then depending on what character's on screen, a guitar will play or a bass clarinet will play. As the narrative goes on, different instruments come in. But with sound design, you always have to factor sound design into the equation. And one of the tricks that we did was we decided that every song was going to be in the key of E flat minor. And we broke the rules from time to time. Like sometimes if it's like a down-to-earth folksy land, it's like A flat Mixolydian, or if it's like a lullaby, it's D flat Ionian, and it's kind of more simple lullaby song. So, but in general, those are the kinds of compromises that we as like game composers have to make from time to time. They're fun compromises in my opinion. They're more like challenges that can inspire,
Let's jump to Roman. So Huracán is a psychological thriller about an MMA fighter who battles with a dissociative identity disorder. How did you, as the film's composer, set out to kind of musically portray this internal struggle, which of course is your job, but how did you kind of crack this character?
There was a real challenge there because of the dissociative identity disorder. There were these three competing layers to the film. So the character had an internal conflict, and that was also manifesting externally. And then on a more tangible level, physically, this character was fighting because he was an MMA fighter. So he had those three levels of conflict. And the director really wanted a score to touch on all three of those facets, but also to carry the story arc. So it was a bit of a heavy lift, and it really was a collaborative process. It's not really my music, it's his music, and I helped him find it. But the way that I approached helping him find it was through combining the I guess orchestral elements or acoustic elements with electronic elements. And I'm sure you all are doing this in your scores as well. But in this instance, I was using acoustic elements that might have been heavily processed, or also using electronic elements that might have had like an acoustic source. Particularly instruments that I was playing in like a unusual or traumatic way, like bowing cymbals or smashing the piano. And I wanted to give a sense of music that was at its heart human, but had been altered through some traumatic experience. That's kind of why I went with this hybrid style. And so to give a brief example of that, I'm sure you all know what this is, but I'll explain it in case somebody doesn't. I used a lot of sympathetic piano vibrations. So I was depressing keys silently on a piano and striking keys around it to cause them to resonate. And then I recorded that and programmed it into an electronic instrument. But it was mainly because it wasn't just the sound I was looking for, it was a metaphor. And whether that just helped me or it helped the director sell what I was doing, that metaphor was the thing that could make beautiful music, was something that was reacting to its environment. And in a macro level, that's really what was happening in the movie. I managed it through just looking at what the story was about and looked to the director to help me find that through all of the tools I had available.
So Miguel, let's land with you. And so you're, of course, you wear many hats. You're a supervising sound editor, an ADR mixer, re-recording mixer. What are the most important differences between each of those kind of professions? Like,
basically, as a sound supervisor, I'm usually the first person in the post-production team to come onto the team. I'll be going through on the script stage if the budget allows for it, and really analyzing what kind of sound effects I think we need to go out and start recording before we even see any picture. And just getting an idea of what we're going to expect out of the project as a whole and what kind of team we can put together. Beyond that, the sound supervisor puts together the team of editorial, and then we go through and have dialogue editors that are specifically with that department, and they deal with everything that comes from the set, not just the dialogue. We even have production sound effects that would be the footsteps that they'll split out apart and make that all nice and neat for the mix and for the international mixes as well. We also have the Foley department that records live sound effects to picture, that gives a nice emotion that you don't really get 100% from just cutting picture from a library of sound effects. Then that'll be accentuated by the sound effects department that really go out there, record a lot of cool sounds that are specific to the show or the film, and also have these extensive libraries that then they use to put things together or synthesize and create these cool new worlds that we haven't heard of before. After that, ADR mixer is really the person that's in a room or a sound facility before COVID. That's there to facilitate recording the voices that had any sort of issues or any added story points that have come in later on in the picture edit. And beyond recording, they'll also do live playbacks, mixing everything back in really quickly with some reverbs and the music and sound effects and stuff, and just give everyone a good feel of how that's going to fit back into the story before you move on. And the last one with re-recording it's essentially the last stop on the road for post-production sound and one of the last stops on the road for the entire film in general. So it's a really important stage for getting everything to come together and make sure that the story is cohesive, everything point is coming across correctly, and the sound is there to enhance everything that it's trying to enhance, and anything that it's not, it's important that we say, hey, this needs to be taken away.
It's Sherri. So of course, in collaboration with Blake Neely, your co-composer on Batwoman, which is awesome. So for such an iconic character, how did you approach the score and themes?
Yeah, it's really funny because I found myself in these projects now where it's like it comes with like a mythology, it comes with a whole legend, and it's like my first instinct is always like terror. Like, oh my gosh, you know, the audience really expects something and they have this emotional attachment to this character, and what am I going to do? But I think that, you know, once you get past that and you calm down, you're like, okay, look, this is what I do. You know, and you have those creative collaboration and those, you know, conversations with the showrunners and creators. I think it just becomes really fun. It's like, okay, but you know what? Everyone's really open to what we want to say or like what our, you know, idea is. I think in the case of Batwoman, I particularly enjoyed working with the villains. Especially with in the Bat world, it's so gritty and dark and seedy, you know, and it's like, you know, in Batwoman, in this particular incarnation of the show, our villain last year was Alice, and she was this, basically, you know, the way that I saw her is she was this adult child who basically never got to be a child. And so I liked playing with the juxtaposition of, you know, childlike but very deranged, you know. So like, you know, what does that sound like? And you just sort of to touch upon the psychology of all that and translate that into music, I think is always for me like just the funnest challenge. The idea of, you know, dark sounds and heavy sounds and a lot of weight to the instruments that you choose, and then these very light ones, maybe things that tinkle around somewhere in the higher range of your ear, but just sonically to put it all in one thing and really get into the psychology of especially the villains is kind of my favorite thing. And particularly in Batwoman, it's fun because of just like I said, the darkness of everything.
Yeah, absolutely. So Carla, you often repurpose elements in a story or scene as musical instruments in your scores. Tell us about this process and maybe an example of what you've done.
Right now I'm actually working on a documentary about Lotte, who was an animator, made the first feature-length animation a decade before Disney. And she cut things out of papers and made silhouettes, and it was all stop motion. This is like back in the 1920s, and it's pretty beautiful. But so for the film, I've been thinking about, how can I bring her scissor cutting to life or make it part of the score? So I put together a little chamber scissor orchestra. I know I'm such a nerd, but it's basically, I took about 12 different types of scissors and some metal, plastic, rubber, and I started creating, just sampling them, and then also different kinds of paper, and I really got into it with getting different sounds out of these scissors, and it was pretty fun, especially like the percussion element. Getting in, coming up with these grooves with it. It's been really fun. And
cool idea, Carla. That's awesome.
Oh,
yeah, it's fantastic. So I want to jump to Annlie. Annlie, you also dabble in music editing. How does that differ from your work as a mix technician, and what are some of your favorite parts of the music editing process?
Well, it's quite different. Like Miguel mentioned, re-recording happens kind of toward the tail end of the process, and so a lot of people have been working on it for a really long time, and then it all comes together toward the end. Music editing, you start actually much earlier in the process. The earliest being, when they have picture and dialogue and temp effects, they want a music editor to start putting temp score in to just give an idea of how everything's working together. And then as you progress further along, you start helping them shape, what they might want the composer to then later, come up with their own version with, as in like, okay, we want this fighting scene and we want it to be very bombastic, so we find that kind of music, or we want it to be like very, simmery and have that kind of energy. And so it gives the composers some idea, without communicating with words, what direction we're going in and kind of what the ideas are that need to go into the scene for them to then come up with a better, more awesome version for the film.
Absolutely. Robert, so both on Sugar Rush and Cold Justice, they now have spin-off shows. What is your process behind changing the music so that the shows have a unique identity, but maybe have like a through line or connection?
It's really like, okay, how do you create the sibling? Basically, it's a long, hard search for what are the similar elements you can bring in to make it a sibling, but like if you have kids, one is shy and one is an adventurer, or one is, it's like, how do you make them different but complement each other?
Miguel, can you speak on the process for designing sound for animated projects like your recent work on Netflix's Legend Quest Masters of Myth?
What I love about animation is it really allows you to stretch the bounds of reality. From everything that's a simple thing like a line of dialogue that you can really push the performance on, or a crazy sound effect that's just so silly that doesn't make any sense, to even the score and how that all works together and comes together to make this crazy little wacky world that you're in. On Legend Quest, it was a super fun show, but it was also really tricky because I guess through the process of iterations of picture editing, we ended up with about 100 to 200 efforts and reactions that had no sound at all attached to them. And we didn't have the time or budget to do any ADR. So I had to spend, a couple of days in the beginning just cataloging every recording that they did for every episode through the whole show. Luckily, they had already done all the episodes of all these different emotions, like, hey, sad sigh, or happy this, or whatever it was, so that I could always be like, oh, I need this from this character and what range of emotion they're going through. We actually managed to pull it off without doing any recordings. We covered everything and it felt right, which was really challenging, but really great to pull off. In another episode on that same show, we had probably about a minute of crazy monkeys that were performed by an actor that was making a monkey sound, but they couldn't get them back. So I spent about an hour or two practicing till I could get myself in the range of the monkey sound, and I re-recorded myself for a couple of hours, and there's about 40 to 50 monkeys in the scene, and they pretty much mostly me in different positions and performances all around us in 5:1. So yeah, it's a weird place in animation.
Roman, so your score for Huracán strikes a balance between using traditional instrumentation and more experimental electronic sounds. What interested you to do this approach, and can you tell us about kind of using this approach for this project?
Sure. So like a few of the panelists mentioned, Steve was saying, it really helps when you have this original sonic concept. It helps the film. And I was lucky in this case that the director was in search of making art first and foremost, because the subject matter was very important, with psychological issues. There was some mental illness discovered, as well as, the implications of that in MMA fighting. So I was very lucky. The film was never temped. I got the script very early on, and I got to discover this palette with the director from a very early stage. So it wasn't necessarily that I was like, this is where we're going to go. I just started getting stuff down, just started making recordings to the script. And then when he started going into camera testing, I was able to do that. And so it was kind of born of the narrative. I mean, there's humanity in the film, and I wanted to represent that through the human aspect, playing orchestral instruments or acoustic instruments. And then again, like I said earlier, there's a great deal of trauma. So I wanted to either play these instruments in a really, violent way, or also to incorporate some like more aggressive synths. And then I kind of bridged the gap with those two things, meaning I was putting heavy processing on the acoustic instruments, or I was making electronic instruments out of sampled instruments. So I guess I was just really lucky that the director, Cassius Corrigan, let me do this. And he let me put these symbolic instruments over top of an otherwise minimalist orchestral score. So it was just a collaborative effort, like all of these things tend to be.
So kind of as we kind of wrap things down, I kind of want to open this up to everybody here. The COVID pandemic has changed so much of how we work, of how we live. How has everyone's work been affected?
Well, before the COVID, I was recording virtually a bit, but now that's all I'm doing. And there's challenges with that. I've kind of, myself kept it to small ensembles. It's a little, you want to experience that time in the studio with the musicians when you're done writing. So I miss that. But in the same sense, we're somehow, I think it's just through music, still able to connect with people virtually. So, I think we're still hoping to get back in the studio again, but.
Yeah. I can definitely share, actually, honestly, from my point of view of working in animation, it's been tricky because all of our recording studios closed at the studio. So we're recording all of our voice talent in remote locations. Sometimes if the studio's opening up, we'll, send somebody in there. We have some stars like Jermaine Clement, Wanda Sykes that are kind of all over the world. So, it's become a tricky situation, especially for TV animation recording, at least from my point of view.
Yeah, since March, it's been pretty tricky. I think we all kind of were trying to find this way of taking this really high-end studio recording technique and taking it into people's homes. But what's been really interesting to learn along the way is how much less of all of this fancy equipment, not to say there's no place for it, but I think we focused so much on the equipment that what it's actually more of the focus is on now for us is the talent, getting them to be in a comfortable space, getting the right quality from them. The things like the environment, we can do things with hanging blankets or moving them from which room they thought was appropriate to record into a better room.
Right.
Obviously we want the highest recording possible, but it's been really great to see people being willing to try and do whatever they can from the actors' sides and from the producers as well. Because it's required a lot of us to collaborate a lot more closely than we would have, I think, in general.
I was just going to say one positive thing has been I'm a guitar player, so that's my main instrument. And one of my 11-year-old daughter is also a guitar player and actually will be better than me very soon. And because she was home, I got to use her on Sugar Rush. And she's really great shredder. Like she loves like Eddie Van Halen and like she's amazing. And so, but it was actually incredible. So I put my 11-year-old to work and it was really, really fun. And so that was the positive side of everybody, COVID and everybody being sort of stuck here.
Yeah, it's definitely changed the way we've worked, for sure. But there's some new things we're learning, some old things we're repurposing. But yeah, it's been a challenge for sure. So another thing that I want to touch on is one thing that I admire about this panel in particular is having such diverse voices here. And as Hollywood is starting to change, there's long ways to go.
I will say that I hope that for future generations, hopefully in my generation, that you never feel more alone in your workplace than you do in your life. I was the only minority woman in my department until I went to music editing. Yeah, so if it can at least reflect the world, if not be a safer place, then that would be awesome.
I'm particularly inspired by the fact that I think a lot of studios are now more aware of that there has been sort of an exclusion, and at the very least, an exclusion of new voices. I personally can't wait for even now, but obviously for the future, that that there won't be this won't be a thing. Like it remains about the music. It just remains about, let's just get a number of new voices in, let's close our eyes, let's listen to the music. Because when you do that, you don't hear gender, you don't hear race. I mean, I think every composer is unique, just simply because we're all individual human beings and we all come with our own story. So I'm really excited about the fact that new voices are coming onto the scene and being given a platform. But I would say, regardless of any of diversity or any, so even white males who haven't been heard from before, I really hope it does come back to the music. But I do think we have to kind of explode before we can figure things out.
I also think that music historically has been one of these things that can bring cultures, peoples together. It's an incredibly powerful art form, and it's done magical things in the past, and it's doing magical things now. But like game audio is certainly there is a hole in with this going. Like we need to be actively thinking about ways, studios in particular, and hiring people of different colors and races. It's just like it's something we have to do, active momentum towards that thing, and not just assume it's going to happen passively.
Right. Yeah. I think it's everyone's aware of it, but now it needs to happen.
Exactly.
Yeah,
absolutely.
The composer space in Hollywood, I'm African American, it's still very white and still very male. And, obviously Captain Marvel, Pinar Toprak is incredible. And, there's definitely, and this year there were some Emmy nominees that were more diverse, and, Chris Bowers is When They See Us, and it's still just very much, it's still very homogenous. And I would say, because the actors and writers, because they have a job that's very upfront, that gets the most attention. And so you're not seeing as much of a push for diversity in the composer space compared to the writer and director space. And there's a good reason why. It's because it's so visual. It's so right out front. It's very obvious. But I think that's a little work that needs to be done.
It is. There is still a very long road to go, especially for below the line talent. But it's about getting your voices heard, and I'm glad that we're doing something like this, because it is giving you guys a voice to talk about your craft. And I've been so inspired by every single one of you. So it's been such a privilege for me. To kind of wrap things up fully, I kind of want to go down the line and get just a one-sentence response from everyone here. I know usually if we had Q&As from the audience, usually the popular question is, how do I get my foot in the door, which can vary differently based on anybody. So kind of going down and based on your specific field, maybe talk about in a sentence, what's something that you did that you think helped open doors for you in your career, something that maybe another aspiring person can relate to and kind of adapt into their own specific journey.
I think mine would be 2 points. One is for this specific field being tech and audio post for film is know your stuff, know how audio works, know Pro Tool or whatever the industry tool is. That's something I came in with. The other thing is I actually started adjacent to post. I started in the foreigns department, and that was kind of how I got to know the people that I work with and the amazing boss that I most recently worked with. So definitely don't say no to opportunities that aren't necessarily exactly what you're looking for. And to be honest, what I thought I wanted to do changed 3 or 4 times through that process. So just keep an open mind, but know your stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Miguel, let's jump to you.
I guess my number one thing would be patient. Each job that you're doing at the time makes up your whole career, and it's easy to lose track of that. It takes time, so remember to enjoy the journey along the way.
Absolutely. Steve.
Yeah, so in games, there's, being a game composer is certainly a sought after thing to do, and it's a very crowded space. So one thing I try to instill upon composers is just to make sure and be authentic to who you are with everything that you write, that you're creating music independently of your projects, and just being a creative, artistic person, and being confident in who you are as you go forward into your professional career.
Absolutely. Yes. Roman, let's jump to you.
Sure. I guess, from how do you get into composition or producing for artists, is just to remember that you shouldn't make music for yourself. You should make music for others. And that's really the core takeaway. When you can love something enough that you want to put it forward, but not love it so much you're worried when other people want to change it, I think you'll be successful.
Absolutely. Sherri.
These are all really good. I wish I had all of your advice when I was getting started. I think one of the most helpful things that someone said to me was, this is going to sound negative, but I think it's a really positive thing. If you can imagine yourself being happy doing anything else, go and do that. Because I think this industry, it's challenging, it's beautiful, it's very rewarding, but it is very challenging. I think patience and persistence is definitely like virtues, things you need to have. And then the last thing I was thinking is, just in terms of being around people, be the person that you would want to work with, because obviously in any of these projects, there's some trenches that we are all in together. And you know what I'm saying? So just be the person that you would want to work with.
Absolutely. That's great advice. Carla.
I would say fundamentally taking the time to discover yourself and who you are as an artist. In between, whether it's in between projects or having that project going that's your own, and then kind of incorporating that and just kind of self-discovery. It's kind of like knowing who you are a bit before you put yourself out there, and yeah, that's what I would say.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And finally, Robert.
I think Carlos was amazing, because I think I spent so much time just unemployed, writing in my studio. And your studio doesn't have to be this amazing thing. You don't have to gear chase. You don't have to, sound chase. If you can make bad sounds sound good, or, bad sound libraries sound good, or, if you'd be surprised what you can do with a few guitar pedals. Like, and I think you can spend your time. Like, don't worry about getting an agent. Don't worry about all that stuff. Don't worry about the career stuff. If you're really good, and the thing is, this town is filled, Los Angeles is filled with really, really talented people. Sometimes what comes out at the end is not the best, but like the people working on it are amazing. That's what you're up against. And they think about this night and day. That's all they think about. That's all they do. It's like that line from the Terminator. That's what he does. That's all he does. And I think if you can sort of master that within yourself and just come out with the best things you can, and, I think people will take notice once you start putting it out there and know when you're ready. And even if you're not quite ready, but this is your thing. And just, just spend your time, just hunker down, spend your time working on it.
Looks like that's all the time we have for today. Thank you to our panelists, Sherri, Robert, Annlie, Roman, Carla, Miguel, and Steve for being here with us today and sharing their wonderful stories and words of wisdom with us. Thank you to Impact 24 PR for putting this panel together, and shout out to the amazing Comic-Con International team. And you can check out the social media handles for our amazing panelists in the description below. Be sure to share your thoughts on social media using hashtag SamMusicAndSound and tag us at Impact24PR. and see y'all next time. Thanks for joining us.